I wasn't a big fan of geology when I became a Christian and started studying how science and the Bible relate. I was more into the biological sciences. But after watching videos and reading some things by Andrew Snelling and Steve Austin, geology took more of an interest in me. And now it's one of my more fascinating subjects that I like to do. And I'm still consider myself just scratching the surface on some of this. But I really get excited about this topic. And sometimes when I get excited, I get really wound up. So I'll try really hard not to speak too fast today. But if I do, I apologize in advance. So road trip, exploring geological features of the Four Corners regions. I'm also going to include a little bit of historical and cultural facts along the way from a biblical worldview, of course. And here we are this morning. And anybody have one of these? You know what to do, okay? Just thought I'd throw that in there. Let me give you a little bit more about my bio here. I was born August 10, 1955, here in the city of Roses. And I was born again in January of 1981, here in the city of Roses. Was baptized later on that year. Prior to that, I had served for 4 years in the United States Navy. I was an electrician, and after that I spent 6 years with the Oregon Army National Guard. Decided to put all that behind and go to college, get my degree, graduated from Portland State in December of '86, and started teaching in Oregon public schools for 17 years. Started in Lakeview, then went to Lyons, Oregon, then to Troutdale, Oregon, then to Hermiston, Oregon, then to Mount Angel, Oregon, then Hermiston, Oregon, then Newberg, and I finished my last 9 years in Newberg, Oregon. So I've been a member of DSA since about 1997, best I can recollect. So, and currently I live in the city of Dundee, which is the traffic jam capital of Yamhill County, if you've ever been there. And my favorite saying is, if you lived here, you'd be home by now. So I want to start with this Bible verse, though. This morning, Genesis 1:2, and the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. I wanted to focus your attention just for a little bit on this term that's being used, the deep, the face of the deep, because it shows up again later in Scripture. So, why did God make the earth with a deep? I'm just putting this out there for you, just to ponder. Why did God make the earth with a deep? At creation, was God aware of Adam's impending sin and the judgment that would come upon the earth in Noah's day? Well, we'd say, obviously, yes, because he's God and he's omniscient and he knows everything. So God made the deep, but then we go on here. In Genesis 7, as we're going through the flood account, it says in the 600th year of Noah's life, in the second month, the 17th day of the month, the same day were all the fountains of the great deep broken up, and the windows of heaven were open. So it appears that God wove, if you will, if I may use a little bit of wordplay here, the fabric of judgment into the creation. He established the deep at the beginning when he said everything was good. And yet later, that deep was part of what God used to bring judgment upon mankind and mankind's sin. I just want you to ponder that because I'm going to get back to this near the end of the presentation. So the Four Corners region, what exactly is the Four Corners region? It is where the states of Arizona, Utah, Colorado, and New Mexico all come together. So this is most of this area is Navajo Nation, Navajo Indian Reservation, but sometimes you're on it, sometimes you're off it. The state of Arizona does not observe daylight saving time, but the Navajo Nation does. So within the state, sometimes you have to bounce back and forth, and it gets a little confusing, but it's not the worst thing in the world to deal with. We're going to start our little road trip. Oh, as Howard said, this was not a single road trip. This was kind of eclectically put together from several different trips. So I've decided to put it in as one mega road trip, which none of us could afford. But don't get discouraged by that. So we're going to start off in Phoenix, okay? So to get to Phoenix from Portland, the fastest way to get there would be to fly. As you fly into Phoenix Sky Harbor Airport from Portland, you would notice as you're flying in these mountains to the north, and this is the McDowell Mountains, and they were supposedly formed, during the Eocene period. And I found this little chart here, and I found it's kind of handy, so I'm going to be referring to this as we talk about contrasting with the uniformitarian geological long Earth, old Earth stuff. And the Eocene right here would be about 55.8 million years ago, supposedly. So just to get you on that. Now, what I want to do, though, instead of talking necessarily about these old ages, is to use a different model that we as creationists can wrap ourselves around better, and I think makes much better sense in the long run. If any of you have seen this video or heard the speaker, Dr. Taz Walker, I don't know if I've seen the video here available at the book center or at the book table, but this video was very helpful to me in understanding geology from a biblical perspective. And it's biblical geology, properly understanding the rocks. It's produced by Answers in Genesis. And in it, Dr. Taz Walker builds what he calls the biblical geologic model. And I want to discuss some of this first before we get going so that we have a biblical template, if you will, for understanding some of these things that we're going to be seeing later on. So he talks about, in the beginning, we had the primordial. This would be when the deep was laid down in Genesis chapter 1. And there was waters. And then you have the ensuing, which is where the gathering takes place, is where the land was gathered into one place and the seas were gathered into another. So at this time, you're going to have movement of earth, you're going to have movement of water. So there's going to be a little bit of perhaps some sedimentation forming, and you're going to have a little bit of erosional features as these things are emerging and straightening themselves all out. Then you have the derivative, which is where God is establishing things are drying out, and the biotic, where he's now laying down the life forms on the earth. Then you have the pre-flood world, which remained relatively, as far as we know from the biblical narrative, relatively unchanged for those 1,600 plus years. Then, during the flood, he breaks down several different stages for the flood. You start with the eruptive phase. This is where those fountains of the great deep were broken open. So you're going to have tremendous amounts of breaking up, and these rock and soil formations are going to be tremendously pulverized and beat up and stirred around. So that's going to create sedimentation and slurry in this water. There's going to be all kinds of contaminants and things floating around. A lot of breaking up of the soil. So that's where we're going to get a lot of these sediments from. Then you have the ascending phase. This is as the waters are rising, and you're going to have all this shuffling going on. And you have to keep in mind, once the water covers the earth, because of the moon, you will then have harmonic tides, which are going to be much more expanded than what we see today. So you're going to have a tremendous amount of shuffling and reshuffling of these sediments in these oceans. Then you have the zenithic phase, where the water reaches its highest peak, and then stays it that way for a certain length of time. And then you have, as the recession begins, you have two phases. The abative phase, which is where water is going to be coming off in large sheets. As these mountains are rising up and the valleys are sinking down, at first the water is going to be coming off in just massive, massive amounts of sheets, which is going to take a lot of soil with it in a kind of a large scraping sort of a fashion. And then you have the dispersive phase. As these begin to settle down, you're going to have channels being formed in these now soft sediments, and they're going to form river valleys and canyons and gorges. After that, you have the residual phase. It lasts for about 500 years. This would account for the buildup of the Ice Age and glaciation. And then after that period, with the melting of the glaciers, the ending of the Ice Age, that's all this period of the modern post-flood world. So just keep this in mind. And whenever you are challenged to think about the geologic column, think about this aspect here, because as we look at different sedimentation layers and erosional features, we can find correlations to how they would fit this model here rather than millions and billions of years. So back to our map. We started in Phoenix, and we're going to jump on Interstate 17 and head north to Flagstaff. I'd love to take you through Sedona, but some other time. Here's a little map of Flagstaff, and I just want you to kind of notice here how the interstate highway comes up, and then Interstate 40 goes this, jogs up, and jogs on out this way, okay? Just so you kind of get a view of that, because that will show up a little bit later. This is the city of Flagstaff. Sits at 7,000 feet elevation. In Oregon, at 7,000 feet, you don't see this. This is the city flag that's taken from Mars Hill, which is the home of the Lowell Observatory, which is where the not-so-planety planet Pluto was discovered way back when. In fact, there is still the observatory there and a museum. And this is actually the telescope that was used. It's been stripped of its mirrors now. But this is the telescope that was used to spot Pluto at the Mars Observatory. Oh, and by the way, Flagstaff has some very pretty sunsets. Just thought I'd throw that in there. If you turn around and look to the north of you in Flagstaff, you will see the San Francisco Peaks. These are the highest landforms in the state of Arizona. And now, just referring quickly to the map again, I want to refer you to this is a NASA composite satellite photograph of the San Francisco Peak areas. Now, this is same sort of a deal. This is a NASA satellite composite photograph. And this is now, you are east and looking west into the main area of the San Francisco Peaks. As we drive up Highway 89, as you look into that area, this is what we saw on one of the days that we drove by. There happened to have been clouds in this basin here. And this reminded me of another visit I had taken recently. The first time I went to this mountain, there were also clouds around it. Now, we all know what happened in the Northwest here with Mount St. Helens in May of 1980. Okay? Mount St. Helens right now, after blowing its top, the elevation at the summit is 8,365 feet. The San Francisco Peaks right now exists as it exists, the elevation is 12,633 feet. That's over 4,000 feet higher than Mount St. Helens is. Now, just for comparison, Mount Hood, which still has its top, is only 11,250 feet. So these San Francisco Peaks are taller than Mount Hood is currently. Now, this is what the official website says about the history of the San Francisco Peaks. I want to read this to you. It says, what happened to the top? San Francisco Peaks are the remnants of the only stratovolcano in the San Francisco volcanic field. So there is a field of geologically active features in this area. This isn't the only one. For decades, volcanologists suggested that the mountain, now called San Francisco Peaks, had simply worn away over time, eroded bit by bit to form its current bowl-shaped top. Then, in 1980, the catastrophic explosion of Mount St. Helens forced us to rethink our ideas about volcano. Nature has a way of forcing people to do things, doesn't it? You see, stratovolcanoes are known for their powerful explosive eruptions, but they usually force their way upwards, producing a gaping crater at the top. Mount St. Helens, on the other hand, blasted sideways, leaving a bowl-shaped amphitheater where a nearly symmetrical mountaintop once stood. Take a look at the two photographs below. On the left side is Mount St. Helens before the 1980 eruption. On the right is a photograph taken after the eruption. And we've seen these photos quite a bit over the 30-some-odd years since then. But they go on. Compare the photographs above with the two below. On the left side, you'll see post-1980 eruption, Mount St. Helens. Again, on the right side are the San Francisco peaks with a line showing the pre-1980 eruption outline of Mount St. Helens, superimposed over the San Francisco Peaks, and of course, to a little bit larger scale. Then the website goes on to say, notice any resemblance? Well, so did several volcanologists. Many volcanologists now feel, oh, isn't it nice to know how they feel, that the scooped out shape of the San Francisco Peaks may be the result of a catastrophic sideways blast like that of Mount St. Helens. And there again is where we appreciate the work of people like Dr. Stephen Austin, who's done a lot of work on Mount St. Helens and has really helped to reformulate the whole idea of catastrophic processes. So as you look at the San Francisco peaks, you can see that there seems to be evidence that at one time this was when they say stratovolcano, we're talking big mega stratovolcano that blew itself out instead of to the north like Mount St. Helens did. This one blew out to the east. And after 1980, people started looking at it and scratching their chins and saying, you know, maybe that's what happened here too. From Flagstaff, we're going to jog up just a little ways. I'm going to take you back to this photograph here. And here's the San Francisco peaks. This is Flagstaff, right down over there. And we're going to look at this object known as Sunset Crater. In fact, it's even a national monument. You can drive it up, Sunset Crater National Monument. Within Sunset Crater National Monument, there are also the Bonito lava flow and the Lennox Crater. And we'll take you to all three of these places now. First of all, though, we'll look at, this is the Bonito lava flow. It is composed of mostly with slight amounts of Pahoehoe lava. Now, I took a geology class from a guy named Dave Corwin in Mount Hood Community College back in 1984, 5. And he was describing to us, and he was talking about the names. Now, Pahoehoe means ropey, and it has kind of a ropey texture, kind of like a batter poured out on the ground. And is mostly angular and sharp and coarse, and he speculated that perhaps maybe a barefoot Polynesian tried walking across it and started going, but, you know, what does he know? But it does help you remember how the names go, so. The Bonito lava flow ranges in thickness from 5 feet at the edges to over 100 feet deep near the center. It covers a few hundred acres. The Lennox Crater Trail, you can actually hike up the Lennox Crater. And so you park the car and you get to hike up this cinder cone. And this is a picture. It's kind of hard to tell from the perspective, but this is actually partway up the trail looking back down the trail. It's all composed of very loose black pumice that shifts under your feet as you walk, and it's very kind of unsettling as you're walking because it'll shift each time you compress it. And but you can get to the top of this cinder cone and stand there and look around. This is actually Sunset Crater, and you can make out from here down to about there is the opening of the vent. But Sunset Crater is off limits to hikers for the very same reason. It is a cinder cone, and they don't want to have, you know, erosion and foots and things going on with the mountain there. Now, this is the official Parks Department map that you get. Now, I wanted to focus on this whole San Francisco peaks and the Sunset Crater for a minute to talk about uniformitarian processes, because the uniformitarians would have you believe that the present is the key to the past. What we see happening today explains what happened in the past, and that we shouldn't bring processes to bear on understanding geology based upon, we're supposed to base it upon what we see now. And yet, there's all this evidence that at one time this area was alive, well, figuratively speaking, was very active geologically. There was stratovolcanoes, there are all kinds, these two, Lennox Crater and Sunset Crater, are only just two of the craters I mentioned. There's also Strawberry Crater, which is located there. There are other craters dotting the region which are smaller and less well known. There are also vents in the ground that you can hike out to. But the point being is that the fact that these obviously existed and have been dormant now for thousands of years betray the whole uniformitarian concept. Things do not happen at the same rates. It's obvious that rates have changed, that things were different in the past, that at one time this area was very active geologically. We don't see it happening today. We don't see it happening in other locations around the world. Yes, we do have active volcanoes. This is true, but the fact that we have extinct volcanic areas that are no longer volcanically active tends to bring the whole uniformitarian paradigm into suspect, but yet the evolutionists have to maintain that whole idea that no, long, slow, gradual process, present, key to the past. No, the past is the key to the present. At one time, this earth underwent very cataclysmic conditions because man was being judged for his sin. And we get to see the results of that. So as you leave Sunset Crater, you can get back on the highway and go north, or you can take the loop road up to Wupatki National Monument. This is Wukoki. The area of occupation was around 1000 AD, and they said about 6 families lived in this area, and they traded with other peoples, indigenous people in the area at the time. Another picture of Wukoki. These Pueblo builders would take a rock or a large formation and start from that and build from there and expand out using existing features and just kind of modify their own little place. This is Wupatki, and about 35 families, if I remember correctly, lived there about the same time. Occupation, they think, was for about 135 years or so before they abandoned this area. When my wife and I first went to this location, I turned to her and I said, "Dear, whatever happens to this world and our economy, I don't have to worry, because if these people could survive, we'll survive." And after the election last week, well, let's not go there. This is located in the area, what's known as the Painted Desert, which has some just awesome scenery, I think. Even the cloud formations. I'm sorry, but I just don't ever see clouds like this in Oregon. So maybe it's just me. So back to the map. We're going to jump back on the freeway now. We're going to head north to just outside of a place called Tuba City, Arizona. Tuba City. Never saw a tuba the whole time I was there, but as you're approaching the city, you will see this sign on the right side of the freeway: dinosaur tracks, 1/4 mile, turn left. I thought it meant you turn left another 1/4 mile down the road. No, you turn left right there and you go a 1/4 mile, so we had to go down and back up, turn around. As you go in, it's not really a 1/4 mile, it's just a couple hundred yards, and you park your car, and there are Navajos there selling, trinkets and things like this there. But this is not Navajo land, but there are Navajo people there that will give you a little tour of the area, and they know the place, and so you can just go ahead and hire their services, or you can just say no thank you, and you can take a walk, tour it yourself. We had a little young boy give us a little walk around, and you get to walk out there, and right after, just feet from your vehicle, you get to see dinosaur footprints. And this dinosaur has been identified as the Dilophosaurus, which, as far as we know, is extinct. I've never seen one, but the prints are all over there. Anybody recognize what this is? Dino doo-doo, coprolite. Yes, this is what it looks like in its petrified form. You get to walk around and see some of that there too. There's even a spot where there is a nest of petrified dinosaur eggs. It's very fascinating. And this is all within probably an acre or so that we walked around in. Now, there's a guy by the name of Doug Sharp, has a website called Revolution Against Evolution, in which he has several articles. This is his homepage. And he has an article produced called The Tuba City Dinosaur and Human Tracks. Apparently, allegedly, however you want to use it, there are human footprints in this same strata with the dinosaur tracks. Now, on our visit there, we were kind of making haste to get to another destination, so we couldn't spend a whole lot of time. I personally never saw the human footprints, but if you were to log on and read this article, it kind of gives directions. We went here in Northeast, and they had their little GPS, whatever, so we didn't have that luxury. But whether you see human footprints or not, it's still quite fascinating to walk out and actually walk across these footprints. Now, if I recall, Dennis Bakavoy, a year or so plus ago, you were talking about an area when you were in South America where you saw dinosaur footprints. And the idea is that this kind of a prints would have been laid down during that ascending phase of the flood, where you would have had a tidal surge, bring in sediments and then retreat, leaving a muddy bottom, and then people, humans, dinosaurs, were scampering across it trying to get to higher ground before the next wave would have come in. So the fact that these tracks exist in sediment means that they would have had to have been put down during that ascending phase of the flood. So we go back to our chart. Somewhere in the late eruptive or early ascending phase of the flood is when these tracks would have had to have been laid down. All right, while we're in Tuba City, let's jog up to Page, Arizona. Page is the recreational center for Lake Powell. And outside of the town of Page, you have a place called Antelope Canyon. Has anybody ever heard of Antelope Canyon? A few people? Okay. Antelope Canyon. This rock here is Navajo sandstone. And to get to Antelope Canyon, I'm way at the range. Okay. Oh, and in Navajo, it's spelled like this, and I think my best guess would be, say, Big Honolini, which could sound like Hawaiian almost, you know, Big Honolini. The place where water runs through rocks. Okay. To get to this place, you only have to find the exit off the highway. You pull in, looks like this, and you rent the services of a Navajo tour guide, because they will not allow people to go in there on their own. They used to, but during flash flood season, people have been trapped in there, and so they don't allow that anymore. You this wash in to the entrance of the canyon, and trust me, you wouldn't make it there in anything other than a four-wheel drive vehicle. So they have these trucks that are modified with open in the back with benches, and they fill one up and then they run you back in. And you arrive at the mouth of the canyon and you disembark, and the tour guide will take you in. They take you from the entrance to the back a half hour, then they give you a half hour on your own to work your way back out through, taking photographs, and you meet and you come back out. It's well worth the hour that you might spend. So you get inside Antelope Canyon. At certain times of the year when the sun is overhead, you'll get shafts of light coming through. We weren't there at that particular time, but again, this canyon was supposedly formed over hundreds of thousands of years, as during the flash flood season, when the flash floods would come through, would take away pieces of this little canyon, start off as a little narrow, little slide, like a little stream, and then eventually got more and more and more and wider, hundreds of thousands, millions of years. But the challenge is, when you actually get inside the canyon and start looking around, you see that the rocks appear to give a different interpretation, because you will see swirls and bowl-shaped carvings and things that don't seem to be indicative of a stream cutting through at a time. There seem to be evidence of turbulence and currents going through here that would not work against hard rock. It would work perfectly if it was soft sediments being carved out. So as you walk through, certain places it's too shadowy to take photographs, but others you can see how these, it's very surreal to see some of these. Like, for instance, this place here, like there was like it looks like a vortex of some point. We're working away at these very circular, sort of cup-shaped depressions. So now you're supposed to think now that the water, I say start off as just a little, and this is supposedly cutting through solid rock doing this, and yet you're getting massive sweeping type of currents. It should be very irregular all the way down, but it's not. You come back out the canyon, you get back in your Jeep, you thank the driver for his time. Our driver was a young, like about 16-year-old guy, and he was sipping on a Gatorade and munching on chips and driving with one hand, and this truck was just sailing along over these, and I just keep thinking, I sort of want, put both hands on the wheel. But no, he'd done it more times than I had, obviously, so he got us in and out of there safely. While you're in Page, something I'd recommend doing, and I haven't done it, it's on my list, is to charter a boat ride, a trip from Page. You can go like 2.5 hours up to this place here, which is Rainbow Bridge, which is the largest natural bridge in the world. That I obviously did not take this picture. I had to borrow this one. But it's They tell me it's worth the sight, and I'm willing to believe it. I would like to try this one out myself, so even I haven't been here. But I thought I'd throw it in since we were so close. As you're leaving Page and heading back in a kind of a southwesterly direction, if you look to your left, just inside the Utah border is this feature. This is Navajo Mountain. It is considered a sacred site to the Navajos, and I'm going to refer to this later after I talk about some other features. I'll get back to that. So we're in Page, Utah, or Page, Arizona now. That's where Navajo Mountain is located, just inside the border of Utah. We're going to swing down around, get back on Highway 160, then turn north here at Kayenta on Highway 163 and head up to Monument Valley Tribal Park. As we leave Kayenta, we'll pass Agathla Peak, also known as El Capitan, which I will again talk about a little bit later. But when you're in Kayenta, you have to stop at the Burger King. And not because I'm making a big promo for Burger King, but because there's something. I remember I said cultural, historical. Okay, so here we go. This is from Ken Rockwell's website. He says, I kid you not, this is the biggest tribute the Navajos ever got for winning World War II for us and bringing us lasting peace to the entire free world. This is located in a Burger King restaurant. It is a dedication to the Navajo code talkers of World War II. In case you didn't see the movie Wind Talkers with Nicolas Cage, the Navajos used their verbal skills to allow us to send critical tactical battlefield information to our Marines while preventing the Japanese from decoding these messages in World War II. The Japanese were able to decode all the messages we sent otherwise, so we reserved the Navajo for the most crucial. In fact, they even used this to transmit the information about the Manhattan Project. And this was all kept classified until the 1960s, or sometime later than that, 68 or something. We owe our country to the Navajo for at least 4 reasons, he cites. 1, they allowed us to test our nuclear weapons in their country, so we knew they'd work properly when called to. 2, they allowed us to mine the uranium to create these vessels of peace from their country. 3, they mined this uranium for us without protective gear or health insurance. 4, they loaned us their linguistic expertise as above. These gifts allowed us to prevail in conventional warfare against the Japanese and also allowed us to create nuclear weapons with which we restored freedom to Japan and the world. Because the Japanese, remember, had an emperor who pretty much told them, this is how you do it, and worship me while you're at it. Without the Navajo, we probably would all be speaking Japanese or German, and all the Navajo got from us for their efforts was an exhibit in a fast food restaurant. That's why you should patronize the Burger King in Kayenta. And this is the movie that they were referencing, if you haven't seen it, which also has some very splendid views at the beginning and end of where we're about to go to next, Monument Valley Tribal Park. To get here, you have to just barely cross into the state of Utah. You turn right, and you go back in, and you're back in Arizona again. But here's the entrance as you drive up. This is the driveway as you're driving in. And you see these buttes out here. And you pull up to the parking lot, and you see this View Hotel. And you walk through the breezeway by the gift shop. And you walk out onto the balcony. And when you get to the balcony, you see this. And if you hang around a little while, it changes. Now, this is what the Navajo spell it. I'm not even going to attempt that. It looks Klingon to me. Probably is Klingon. I don't know, but it means clearing among the rocks. Now, these buttes, let me just quickly set these down here. There's a way you can remember their names. As you're looking like this, okay, imagine you're looking at a map, and you put your hands in front of you. This is west, this is east. So this is West Mitten, this is East Mitten. Buttes, and the one without the little thumbs is Merrick Butte. Now, I want you to look at Merrick Butte here and say, well, just looking at it from this photograph, which does not do it justice, you say, well, how big is that thing? Is it as big as a house? Is it as big as a city block? I mean, how big is it? Please notice this corner right down there. That is actually 2 vehicles and a bunch of people. Put it back in perspective. The thing is enormous. It's probably 5 or 6 city blocks, and that tall as well. It's enormous, and they just shoot right out of the desert floor with a fairly minimal amount of debris. at the bottom. Fairly minimal in terms of this thing is supposedly millions of years old. It's been there for that long. What's going on here? As you turn around and look behind you, you'll see this is the hotel, the View Hotel. The room rates vary depending on the season. Every room has a view of Monument Valley, and so you can watch the sunset or rise, both from there. They have a 4-star restaurant. It's all run by the Navajo. There's no casinos there, no swimming pool. It's just a very, very nice establishment. While you're standing at the viewpoint, you'll see this little sign. This is John Wayne's Point. And this little placard there says that it has been said that this was John Wayne's favorite place to enjoy the beauty and serenity of Monument Valley. And I would certainly agree with that. His first movie filmed in Monument Valley was John Ford's classic Stagecoach in 1939. He starred in 4 more movies in Monument Valley, culminating with his fan favorite, The Searchers, in 1952. I've seen both of those movies. If you're into Westerns, you should too. So let's take a little drive into Monument Valley. You paid the $5 admission fee to get here. The driving through is free. You can do this. And besides, if you come in by bus, like a lot of tourists do, you have to charter a ride, which is put you on the back of a truck, and they give you a little particle mask to wear because of all the dust. So it's better to take your own vehicle. So you drive in. You have those buttes there. This is Elephant Butte. There's the head and the trunk, and then here's his back. Supposedly, that's why they name it that. You drive around. This is Camel Butte. Here's the head, and then here's the humps on the back of the camel. These are the 3 gossips. And this is also known as John Ford Point. This is where the director, John Ford, liked to set up his cameras to film the scenes that took place in the valley. These are the totem poles. Still getting a little bit of a ringing on the mic, but I think we're okay. This is out in the valley looking backwards as you're heading back out. There are other features here that I haven't included, but this is the valley floor looking up at the hotel where we were just at. So, and this was this whole inspiration for this was come from a young Navajo woman who took business classes and said, I think we should do this. I think this would be good for instead of just leading tours into here, we should build this hotel. And so got the financing together. It's all private operation, and they did it. And they, like I say, they don't have a casino or anything going on there to associate with it. And it's a very fascinating place. But you get back in time. First, now let me talk about the rocks themselves here. This is Merrick Butte again. It's composed of the following. You have the Oregon Rock Shale at this level, followed by the Deshay Sandstone. Don't let this spelling fool you. We'll talk about that later. Then we have a line right here. Above that, we have the Moenkopi Formation, followed by the Shinnerup Formation. Boy, aren't you glad you're not the one they named that after? Okay, Shinnerup Formation. So why do we have this line here? Because this is the boundary between the Permian and the Triassic layers. Permian and Triassic. So what does that mean? Well, let's go back to our charts. Permian, Triassic, 199.6 to 252. So roughly 225 million years separate these 2 layers of rock. And yet, you look at that thing. It's flat. In fact, all these layers around here are flat. Which again, millions of years, sand deposits, come on. So, another look at the valley. Long, slow, gradual, millions of years, uniformitarian, blah, blah, blah. I don't believe it for a minute. I hope you don't either. As you study these things, you can see, and you can trace them across the different buttes. This was all laid down at one time because it was all flat. But stop now and consider the erosional forces at play here. Because at one time, this entire valley was full of sediments. And they were all scoured out of here. And they're all taken someplace else. Look in the horizon. Do you see those deposits out there somewhere? Unless the prevailing wind for 50 million years was prevailing from the northeast and blew it all into the Gulf of Cortez, I don't know where they went. Because you could drive from here back to Tuba City for an hour's drive. You won't see it. It's just not there. But yet something took all of these sediments out of this valley and left these monuments, these pillars. I think it's a wonderful testament to the flood to not only lay this stuff down, but to scrape it all out afterwards and leave these little things to people to enjoy. So here's what the official website says. This picture of East Minton Butte there. No, that's actually West Minton, excuse me. I don't know why they got that wrong, but it's not the first time I caught a mistake on this. Oregon rock shales are Permian deposits found in the Cutler red beds, layers of siltstones and shales found extensively on the Colorado Plateau. These layers were deposited by streams carrying sediments from the ancestral Rockies. And the reason they say that is because they find little cobbles and things, and they say, well, these don't get blown in by wind, so they had to have been by a stream, they say. Oh, how generous. The DSA sandstone is cross-bedded, a type of deposition that results from in many different surfaces on an inclined rather than horizontal plane. Wind-blown dune deposits produce this type of deposition. Well, don't believe everything you read, except in God's Word. This process can be seen to be occurring today at Great Sand Dunes National Monument. I would say, with one exception, the Great Sand Dunes National Monument isn't being cemented together into rock. It's still sand and it's still blowing around. Spread across the states of New Mexico, Arizona, Nevada, Colorado, Utah, California, Utah, and Colorado, the Moen copy is a lower Triassic formation, red in color and typically sandstone. In Monument Valley, the formation is represented by shale deposits. Part of the valley have been mined for uranium, which is found in some areas of the Shinnerup siltstone. Deposited by streams. Well, this isn't the only place you're going to find this stream. We're going to come across this later on in our travels, and you say, wow, that stream really got around, didn't it? It went here, then here, and over here, and over here, back. Amazing that a stream could do all that. And wind-blown dune deposits. Well, it's also been shown that you can get cross-bedding through waterborne sedimentation as well. So wind-blown isn't the only explanation. And later on, I've got some even better stuff to show you. So there again is that butte. Does that look like sand? Just kind of blew it all into place and then just happened to cement it all together. And then it withstood the rest of the erosion. Because remember, no matter how you explain the formation, you still have to account for the erosion. What took everything else away and sent it packing a long, long distance away? Where did the sediments go? That's the big question you have to ask yourself. And as you stand and look at these formations, you just have to look and say, as my wife said, there was some serious water here. By the way, as far as this photograph, I wish I could take credit for this photograph here, taken at just before sunset, but I have to give credit to this one to my wife. This was her camera that captured this one. But that's okay, because I got her the next morning. So, referring back to our biblical geologic model, this would have been the abative phase. Sheet erosion would have been responsible for taking all these massive amounts of sediments out of there and leaving these monuments. If you decide to spend the night at the hotel, this is what the lobby looks like from the little mezzanine above. And the next morning, you could wake up to this. And as it progresses, you see the sun coming up behind the East Mitten. And this is, well, it makes you want to skip breakfast, I'll tell you. So let's hit the road. We're going to jump on Highway 163, start heading northeasterly out of, there we're back into Utah. We get to milepost 13, and you look at this, and does anybody recognize where they might have seen this before? In a movie a couple years back. This is where Forrest Gump came to an end of his running. And just like that, my running days was over, he said. And it happened right here. And you can stop and you can actually, yep, this place really does exist. It's right out there. And it's known as Monument Pass, incidentally. So nothing to say about the formation or the erosion or everything there. Just thought you might be interested. So, but from there, we're going to go just a little ways down the road, and there are four more little sites of interest, all packed within a short little distance of each other. First one is Mexican Hat Rock. Then we'll jump over here to Gooseneck State Park. Then we'll back out and jump over here and take the Valley of the Gods Scenic Drive, which is an unpaved road. Then we're going to hit the Moki Dugway, and then from there go north. You still with me? I think we're doing good on time. I think we're okay. This is Mexican Hat Rock. This is located near the San Juan River. And they didn't want to call it sombrero rock because they figured people would have a hard time spelling it and pronouncing it, which they probably would. So they called it Mexican Hat Rock. And there's some picture. There are actually 2 trails that will allow you to hike up to the little shoulder right up there. And you can, I haven't done that. Didn't spend the time doing that. But you can drive up to this spot here. This was shot out I didn't get out of my driver's seat to shoot this photo. This is part of what's known as the Jalguito Formation, which is right down here, which is at the end of the Pennsylvanian period before the Permian. Where would that supposedly put this formation? Pennsylvanian, Permian. Oh, about 300 million years ago, something like that, 299 million. And then it was eroded so long that over time, and it's still sitting there, still balanced for all these millions and millions and millions of years. Can you imagine that? Just incredible. Gooseneck State Park, next. You drive, and as you're driving away and you turn around and look behind you, you see this interesting formation. These sediments were tilted and then eroded off, and it left these very interesting chevrons. And you get to the viewpoint, and there's really nothing at Gooseneck except a viewpoint. And this is what you see. And if you have a panorama feature in your camera, you can see that. And I got one more of those. We'll have to take care of this during the break, I think. This is a satellite photo. This area is known as an incised meander or an entrenched meander. In this 1.5 miles from here to here, the San Juan River travels 6 miles to cover 1.5 miles for the territory. So how did this get there? How do they explain all of this? I mean, the Tualatin River does this kind of thing too, but it's a slow little river, and so on. But I can try to read this for you, but it's kind of boring actually. When the Eocene meandering rivers cut into the resistant Cedar Mesa sandstone, the meandering patterns established in the overlying non-resistant rocks were superimposed on the resistant sandstone. So what they were saying was that on top of this, that there was a superficial layer on top of this hard sandstone, and it was non-resistant. And some water came along and it made a course there and kind of established the meandering pattern. And then for some unknown reason, it says, for reasons related to tectonics or climate or both, they don't really know. All of a sudden, they say the base level of the Colorado River changed and all these little streams started moving a lot faster. And then they started cutting through this rock. It was a process that they sometimes call rejuvenation, okay? Because they said that, you shouldn't get an entrenched meandering pattern laid down through hard rock. It shouldn't happen. So there must have been soft sediments and a slow stream that etched through these soft sediments, made this meandering pattern, and then later somehow all this water now had to follow this meandering pattern. But it seems very implausible. However, if there were soft sediments and you had massive runoff during the channelized phase of the flood, it could have easily cut meandering patterns in this rock and made these incredibly windy, twisty features in the river. Okay, we're going to keep moving here. This is Valley of the Gods now. This is a self-guided tour. There's no admission fee. There's no tour. There's no motel. There's nothing here, really. There was a bed and breakfast, but it's now closed. And you just get to drive through. And the formations are very similar to those in Monument Valley Tribal Park. And you can just take a look at them and drive on by and just enjoy them at your leisure before you head back out onto the highway. Okay, I jumped ahead. This is Cedar Mesa. Now we're approaching the Moki Dugway. I've talked to you about Cedar Mesa sandstone. This is Cedar Mesa. And as you drive up to it, you're saying, where's the highway? What's going on, dear? And you see the sign that says 10% grades, 5-mile-an-hour switchbacks, narrow gravel road, 1 mile ahead. And you say, we're driving on this? And you say, yeah, we're driving on this. 800 feet, you run out of pavement. And then the fun begins. You start climbing up the side of Cedar Mesa. and up. And talk about switchbacks. Oh, yeah, they're there. And just for fun, here's a little movie experience of it. Try not to look at your left there and see what's going on. But as we're driving up, look at these wonderful flat layers that we're driving through. Just stacked like pancakes right on top of each other as you go along here. This road, for being a gravel road, is actually quite well maintained. You'd be surprised. Very few washboards, and at the corners, they're nice and wide with safety rails, so you can make out there. So it's not a terrifying experience for either the driver or the passenger. But again, just each contact line between these layers, flat, 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 flat. And you get right up close and personal. You don't have to hike down in the Grand Canyon to see these. You just get to look out your window. And we came up on this truck. He was just sitting there waiting for somebody. I don't know what was going on. And you're around the corner, and a little bit more. This doesn't last much longer. But you get the idea. You get going up there, and you get to go right along the face of this whole cliff there. When you get to the top, this is your view, looking back out. And this sign here. You're now at 6,425 feet. You just came up 1,100 feet in 3 miles. When you get to Natural Bridges National Monument, which is our next stop, there used to be this sign that talked about the Moki Dugway, and it read as follows. The Moki Dugway is located on Utah Route 261, just north of Mexican Hat, Utah. It was constructed in 1958 by Texas Zinc, a mining company, to transport uranium ore from the Happy Jack mine in Fry Canyon, Utah, to the processing mill in Mexican Hat. The 3 miles of unpaved but well-graded switchbacks descend 1,100 feet from the top of Cedar Mesa, on which you are now standing. The state of Utah recommends that only vehicles less than 28 feet in length and 10,000 pounds in weight attempt to negotiate this steep 10% grade, narrow, and winding road. To that I would say amen. The term Moqui is derived from the Spanish word moqui, which was a general term used by the 18th century Spanish explorers and settlers in this region to describe the Pueblo Indians that they encountered and the vanished culture which had left behind the numerous ruins they discovered during their travels. This term continued to be used by the Anglo pioneers who moved into southern Utah during the 1800s and their descendants. Today, the standard term used to describe these prehistoric Native Americans who lived in this region more than 1,000 years ago is ancestral Puebloans. It is based on present-day Puebloan tribes, and archaeologists believe that these people were the ancestors of today's Hopi, Zuni, Acoma, and Rio Grande region cultures. You may also see them commonly referred to as the Anasazi, a Navajo word meaning enemy ancestors. And that's kind of interesting too, is the Anasazi, describing the Anasazi, that's a Navajo word, but Navajo is a Spanish word, which comes from Navajo, which is a knife, because the Navajo were really skilled at different knives that they used. So you get these people naming these other people, and we call them by the names that the other people gave them, and it's kind of strange. But anyway, from the Moki Dugway, we zip up here to Natural Bridges National Monument, and then we're going to take a break after that. So you arrive at Natural Bridges National Monument. On the day we happened to arrive, earlier there had been a little bit of snow, and somebody built a little snowman on the thing, and then the sun came out and melted almost all the snow, except for him. This is the map of the park. As you drive in, you come to the visitor center, and then you start a one-way loop. It takes you around. The first bridge you come to is Sipapu, and then you drive out to Kachina Bridge, and then around to Owachamo Bridge, and then back around. On our first trip, we hiked out to each of the bridges and back. On the second trip, we drove around to Owachamo Bridge, and then we hiked the trail up and over and then hiked through the canyons back to the bridge and left. And I've forgotten to take my sunscreen. Don't do that. But this is Sipapu Bridge, the first one you get to. Right there. Kind of hard to see from this perspective, so we'll get you a little closer. There again. Now, again, perspective here does nothing. You get up close and personal is the way to do it. So here is a little chart that they have, and it shows you the size of the opening. The opening of Sipapu Bridge, I'll tell you in a minute how big it is, but here is a little thing, and they say this is all Cedar Mesa sandstone, Natural Bridges, Monument Valley is Oregon Rock Shale up there, Arches National Park, Entrada Sandstone up there, we'll get to in the second half. And this tells you a little bit about how they were laid down, again, deposited as dunes, but we're gonna see some stuff that would indicate otherwise. Tilted, uplifted, slowly exposed. Well, let's see what happens. Now, this is from their official website. For the most part, the process is probably fairly accurate, but the timeline is really distorted. So the stream came this way originally, made this meander, and then eventually it cut through this way. And here's the satellite view. Originally it came this way, and then came around through this meander here, and back around, and then eventually cut through right here, leaving the bridge right here from the top. As you hike down, you get a little bit more of a view. And when you get right down underneath it, you cannot get it in your viewfinder. It is so big. In fact, the dome of the U.S. Capitol building where the Congress and Senate meet can fit under this bridge. Now, if we could maybe get some of the congressmen and senators, no, don't get me started on that. This is known as desert varnish. It's caused by manganese oxide, which leaches out during the rains, and it stains the sides of these cliffs, and it leaves these little really interesting looking black stripes. And you can see them in various places. Okay, so here's an example of that cross bedding. You see, this way, that way, that way. But then look at that contact line right there. And there's more cross bedding there, another line right there. But these lines between the layers are all still flat. And notice the vertical canyon walls. Long, slow erosion would have caused them to be more V-shaped. These are sheer. This is Kachina Bridge. Get closer again. And here's a little map, a little diagram. It tells you about how the meander was. This is actually where two canyons. Originally this way, it came in here, and then it bypassed and made this. And here's the aerial view. Originally came down, and then bypassed this way. This is where the other canyon comes in. And when you stand under Kachina Bridge, this is what you see. This is the most massive bridge they have there. This section right over here cleaved off a few years ago and left some debris there. If this whole thing was formed that way, there should be more debris, but there isn't. The debris has been taken away. This was me standing back, taking a picture of my wife, who's getting ready to take a picture of this location right there, because Kachina Bridge happens to be the site of the controversial clicker that won't work, controversial petroglyph, the sauropod dinosaur petroglyph. Can you make it out there? Okay, I will enhance it here for you. Answers in Genesis on their website has this, the one of many, but this article written by Ishmael Abrams, a Christian apologist, and he goes through, and basically, you know, there are people that the evolutionists debunk this, say, well, this is just something else. This was somebody who came along afterwards. This is because these people wouldn't know this. They've actually had credentialed secular archaeologists go there and they examine it and say, well, as far as we can tell, this appears to be authentic. But it must have been a mythical creature because these people would never have seen a creature like this. And yet, right next to this, you have antelope and turtles and other creatures that they all knew about, and spiders and things. But for some reason, this is just an enigma to some people. Well, not if dinosaurs and man actually existed together. As you walk through the canyon, you'll see, here's some example of that tilting. And here's another wonderful example of the cross-bedding. But look at that contact line. If this was supposedly wind-blown sand, why didn't that wind-blown sand, when it first started blowing in, mess up this layer underneath it? Why isn't there discontinuity? Why aren't there irregularities between these different layers? Wind-blown sand doesn't explain that. But rapid sedimentation and erosion does. This is one of the canyon's native inhabitants, which barely will stand still long enough for you to get that picture. You have to really be far away and do a quick zoom. This is Owatchamo Bridge as you come back out. There is no water going under Owatchamo Bridge, and yet it was still formed by water processes, because in this case you had two creeks The initial stage had them going like this, and then it made the bridge, and then this channel formed also and bypassed the bridge. So now the bridge has no water. It would have followed this course here, meander back this way, around and around and out. And now goes through, and this is where the bridge is located right there, because now it just kind of comes this way and bypasses. And as you leave Natural Bridges National Monument and head north on Highway 191, we pass this little thing. I call this Parcheesi Rock. Because when I was a little boy growing up, we used to play Parcheesi, and we had these little things that looked kind of like this thing. I thought, hey, look at that. Out in the middle of a field, just there. And then you drive by, this is Wilson Arch, right off, in fact, this is right off the highway. You get out your car, snap the picture. This was in the morning, so the sun is behind it, so we'll catch it on our way back out at the evening after we arrive at Arches National Park. This is the map of the southern half of Arches National Park. You drive in and you go to the visitor center and you go to the bathroom and you buy your souvenirs and you do things and then you leave and you start wending your way up and you come to a couple different spots which we're going to see, and eventually we're going to go up and through the rest of the park. And so let's get going. As you drive in, this is one of the first things you'll see of prominence in the park. This is the entrance to a place called Grand Avenue. And this stone is called Queen Nefertiti, which because it looks like kind of an Egyptian, kind of a regal rock just sitting out there waiting to fall, which it hasn't. This is the actual Grand Avenue. It's this grotto that is flanked on both sides by these rocks, and especially this one on the right, they call them fins, which we'll see more of in the Arches National Park here. And Arches National Park is composed mostly of the Entrada sandstone, which, according to the classical evolutionary uniformitarian blah blah long age stuff, right here in the upper Jurassic portion, it is composed of three members: the Moab Tongue member, the Slick Rock member, and the Dewey Bridge member, which, you know, you can memorize those if you want to, but not worth it. So, pardon me? No, no test today, believe it or not. Yes, I'm not giving you a test on this one. So we said Upper Jurassic, which puts us right about, let's say, 155 or so million years ago. I have to roll my eyes every time I think that. So as you drive back into the park, you see these formations just jutting straight out, coming very vertical. This is called the Oregon. And the one behind it, well, then you get to the three sisters, and then you have, this one is called the Tower of Babel. Interesting information. Not sure exactly how they were called, but a lot of things in Utah are named after biblical references, especially like in Zion National Park. But notice these fins, and they all are oriented in a northwesterly, southeasterly direction, which I want to show you in a little bit here. This is the Salt Valley Overlook. Because this formation here, these were formed by a large underground salt reservoir that shifted at one time and caused these formations to occur. This is a place called the Fiery Furnace. Doesn't look very habitable, does it? No. And well named. So again, this is the upper part of the park as you come through. We're going to go past these areas here and past this area here. We're going to start at the end and then kind of work our way back out. It's kind of like what I like to do when I go to a place, is drive to the end and kind of take my time in coming back out. So I want you to notice here the Devil's Garden Trailhead has a loop here at the end, because we're going to see this coming up. This is the satellite photograph of Arches National Park. As I zoom in, I want you to look at the general topography of this area. Notice that everything seems to be running in lines northwest to southeasterly. And then here is that loop again, right there. Get a little bit closer. There's the tip of the loop, and this is the Devil's Garden Trailhead. And again, you see these, they look like pock marks now. As you get closer, you get to see the formations become even more interesting. As you get an even closer aerial view, Again, you get to see that you'd almost think that a whole lot of water went racing off in like a particular like northwest to southeasterly direction at one time. You might think that way. And then here is Landscape Arch, which, since we're out there, let's take a hike. And this is Landscape Arch. This is the largest natural arch in the park. Now, we had talked about natural bridges. I want to talk about arches for a minute, and then I'm going to talk about some literature about their formation. This is the longest arch in the park, and the most fragile probably at this point right here is probably good. They anticipate that this will probably be the next arch to collapse. But they had thought this for a long time, and nature proved them wrong again. This is Wall Arch, or more correctly, I should say, this was Wall Arch. This is what it is now. In August of 2008, one night when nobody was around, it collapsed. Now, if a rock arch collapses in the night when there's nobody here, did it make a noise? Okay, from the Journal of Creation is this very well-written and very technical article by Michael Ord, who we all know about here in Design Science Association, and he talks in it about natural bridges and arches formation. So we had this handy as we were taking our trip, and it really is kind of referencing back to his, what does he say about this part again? So we found this to be a little helpful reference to us, and I've tried to highlight certain areas from this article to help explain the arch formation and also referencing back to the natural bridge formation. And I'm pleased to report that we're not getting any static from the microphone. Thank you, Walter. Okay, he says basically in his opening here, freestanding rock arches and large natural bridges are observed to collapse today, such as Wall Arch in Arches National Park in early August 2008. The formation of large arches and natural bridges from slow weathering and erosion would take tens of thousands of years. However, the uniformitarian hypotheses for their origin are not observed. We observe their collapse. We don't observe their origin, is what he's saying. A rapid process of erosion in the past, consistent with the retreating stage of the flood, is more likely. And then he goes on to lay out his argument, which is what we will look at here. So, allow me, please, to go ahead and read a little bit from this. Rock arches are believed to form slowly over long periods of time by physical and chemical weathering. 4 steps are proposed. 1, uplift that causes deep vertical parallel fractures to form, which was caused by that salt dome shifting. 2, weathering and erosion that enlarge fractures, resulting in narrow walls or fins, which is what you can see, like those, the Oregon and the Tower of Babel. 3, continuing erosion with some fins breached from below. And 4, continued weathering that enlarges the holes and eventually causes the arch to collapse. That's the uniformitarian hypothesis. It is assumed that it takes a long time to form an arch. Geologists estimate that it would have taken 70,000 years of water, frost, and wind operating in a dry climate to form the isolated Delicate Arch in Arches National Park. Nearly all the arches in southeast Utah formed in only 2 specific sandstone formations in the area. Here is a picture of Delicate Arch. This was shot with my wife's 30 zoom lens from a viewpoint half a mile away. This is the most photographed arch in Utah. In fact, it's the most well-known arch in Utah. In fact, it is so well-known that they put it on the Utah license plates. We got to Delicate Arch at the end of our day after we had hiked natural bridges the day before. Now we were hiking all the way out on the Devil Gardens Trail and everything. It was a 1.6 miles out and back, 1.6 miles out, 1.6 miles back to Delicate Arch, and we were thinking, you know, we've covered a lot of ground in the last 2 days. Let's save that hike for the next trip that we may or may not take. So we just did the viewpoint thing and shot, that's why. So we still have an incentive to go back. Assumed uniformitarian origin not observed. He goes on, now we're talking about this assumed origin. The origin of freestanding arches as opposed to windows, which is another whole thing, and the larger natural bridges is mysterious. The explanations in the literature assume slow processes of erosion over tens of thousands of years, according to the principle of uniformitarianism. The problem with that much time is that the bridge or arch should have weathered and collapsed long before the material around it was able to erode and leave behind an arch or natural bridge. Crickmane noted that natural bridges seem to defy uniformitarianism. So what they're saying is that it shouldn't just be the bottom of the bridge eroding out and leaving, the bottom of the arch eroding out and leaving the arch. The whole thing should be crumbling. And they talk about possible reasons why, but then more the geologists have looked at, the more those ideas are being refuted. What is remarkable about talking about natural bridges now, history is that in all the time required for the stream currents to corrade downward and laterally through a vertical depth of from 10 to 12 or 60 meters in resistant rock, the progress made by denudation towards destroying the fragile-looking bridge appears to have been virtually nil, a discrepancy in rates of action that may exceed 100,000 to 1. Now, what they're saying basically is this. Those illustrations I showed you of the channels of the stream came down, meandered this way, and eventually then cut through. When it was originally cutting its way down through that supposedly hard rock, it was making this bend, and it was just following the same contour down, 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 down. And then all of a sudden, after it gets down so many meters, then it starts to bore through. Why is that? Well, they said, well, it must be that that rock down below had weaker sedimentation. It was less resistant, and that's why it was able to get through. So I said, well, that's a great explanation. That fits our uniformitarian process. But then when geologists get down there and start chipping away on the rocks around the sides, they say, this stuff is just as hard as the stuff right above it. What's going on here? And so that's where this whole uniformitarian process starts to get called into serious question. They say, why, when that water was corrading down through this canyon, wasn't it just barreling right on through? Why did it make that bend for so many hundreds of thousands of years before it started going straight ahead? That's what they cannot explain. No, pointer goes this way, this one goes this way. Okay, I'm good. Some geologists suggest that the erosion of a less resistant rock underneath a more resistant rock causes the arches, but such a mechanism can account for few arches at best. Other hypothesized mechanisms are no more likely. Cruikshank and Aden summarize, there is no need to invoke reasons such as weak cement, unloading, or exfoliation to explain the presence of arches, especially when these processes act on similar rocks in nearby regions without producing the same abundance of arches. So we say the weak cement idea, the exfoliation is where it like frost gets in the cracks, it expands, it cleaves and stuff off like this. They said that doesn't really, that might account for a little bit, but you know, it's not showing consistency over this whole region. Cruikshank and Aden, these are two of these geologists that Orr is refuting here, hypothesize that the majority of arches are caused by local enhancement of erosion by fracture concentration, which they have identified in many arches. Why was such an obvious mechanism somehow missed by previous investigators? However, no one has seen an arch formed by this mechanism. So he's saying that these, maybe after a while, fractures developed in this narrow rock ledge, and the fracturing from whatever weathering process caused the rock to be weaker and caused the water to go through. And yet, when they look at other narrow fins, they're not, fins that haven't formed arches yet, they're not seeing the fracturing that they would have had to have. They say, well, where do you get the basis for this fracturing model? Because these fins over here don't show that kind of fracturing that would allow for that eventual collapse. Thus, long freestanding arches do not seem to be forming today in Arches National Park. In other words, stage 3 and early 4 are not observed. And like wall arch, we do observe late stage 4, their collapse. Erosion by normal weathering processes during the formation of large natural bridges and arches should have destroyed these features, that would be the bridges and arches, long before eroding down to their present levels. Large natural bridges and arches imply more rapid erosion, the type of erosion that would have occurred during the retreating stage of the flood. Arches would have formed during either the sheet flow or channelized flow phase of the retreating stage, while natural bridges probably formed during the channelized phase. So again, he says the arches would have formed either during the sheet erosion or the early part of the channelized erosion. The natural bridges would have formed during the channelized phase of the erosion. But again, you have to have much more water involved than what's currently going through those streams in those natural bridges. And in the case of the arches, you have to have more waterway to take away this debris that's being formed under the arch. Where did all that debris under the arch disappear to? Arch formation cannot be due solely to weathering and erosion, however, because these processes are not restricted to the sites of arches in rock fins. Erosion is going on everywhere. There must be some factor that locally enhances the effects of erosion within a rather small part of a rock fin to produce an arch. How erosion is localized within a rock fin to form an arch is enigmatic. This is what Cruikshank and Aden say. Well, it's enigmatic only if you're unwilling to let go of your uniformitarian paradigm. So again, a little satellite image there showing you again how when this dome formed in this northwesterly part of the region, it formed a bulge, and when that shifted, these rocks here, so this is the diagram that the geological people give, would have formed these fracture lines, and then eventually they weather, and then somehow they just weather into an arch, and then eventually the arches fall apart and collapse. Well, the problem with that is, from what we were just looking at in this technical article, is that the evidence seems to be that this can't happen, that there can't be natural weathering from these processes as described because of the whole microfracturing thing. In the fins that are still solid, they don't see any evidence of that. And if it was caused by fracturing, then when that debris falls out, well, how come there's no debris under these arches? Where did the debris go after being formed by these arches? The rainwater just came and dissolved them into little tiny pieces and eventually washed away? Doesn't seem very plausible either. However, if you could imagine fracturing occurring and lots of water running off of here, imagine these cracks here. If you have water going down into the cracks, then when it hits the bottom, it's going to create turbulence in the bottom. Like when you pour water into a pitcher, it kind of gets all whirly and swirly down the bottom. Well, that kind of action can cause these things to kick out at the bottom if you have lots of water. But you have to have dynamic processes, not passive weathering processes at work to make those arches form. In fact, if you take the Garden's Devil Trail, you can actually walk across an arch. And notice how even on top of these fins, there are cracks that run. And on our trip, I ran into a guy whose name was Mike, and he was from Portland, Maine. And he had an Olympus camera, identical model as mine, except for different color. So him and his gal stood there, and I took their picture, and then me and my gal stood there, and he took our picture. So there we go. So you never know who you're going to meet on a trail like that. So a few more arches in the park. This is Pine Tree Arch, named because of the pine tree. And this is Window Arch, which is more of a window, which is, again, a little slightly different thing. But again, windows are not formed to that same method. This is Turret Arch. No, that last one was Tunnel Arch. Tunnel Arch. This is Turret Arch, and this is Window Arch. And Window Arch is actually two of them. The other one you can't see. It's behind there. And then this is Double Arch. And these arches are in perpendicular angles to each other. And just for scale, there are some people walking down the trail. And just for more scale, this was me standing underneath the thing and the desert varnish there. But again, these arches, according to Michael Ord and other geologists, are saying, this uniformitarian formation thing just doesn't seem to be supported by evidence. As you're driving back out, you will see balanced rock. And what's kind of cute here is you see right here, there's a different color of thin layer of sandstone there, but you can also see it over here, and you can also see it over there, and it shows up in various places. Where'd all of the intervening rock go? It's been hauled out of there, carted out of there, washed out of there by some process. And while you're in Moab, Utah, you have got to eat at Pasta J's. This place is so good. I can still almost in my mind taste the green chili ravioli with zesty tomato cheese sauce I had there. Oh, it was to die for. But, this is not about culinary things. But if you're in Moab, please, by all means, Pasta J's. You've got to try this place out. It's so good. And they even have gluten-free pasta in case you need that. All right, we're leaving Moab, Utah. We're heading south to Monticello, and then we're going to zip over here. Just kind of slice our way into Colorado. Sorry, there's really nothing on this trip from Colorado we're going to talk about. But it's Four Corners region anyway. As you leave, you'll see Wilson Arch in the afternoon sun. and you arrive in the town of Shiprock, New Mexico. And there's really not much to see there. This is Navajo reservation land. There are no motels. There are some fast food restaurants. But Shiprock is significant for another reason. Now, you all recognize this, being the Northwest here. The name of this place is what? This is Beacon Rock. And we all know around here that Beacon Rock is a neck of a volcanic activity. And then the area around it was scoured away and left this dome here. Okay? But lava, basalt, has to form within it. It doesn't just come out of the ground and form a tower like this. It has to have an encasement, a mold, if you will, for this cast to be made. Well, in northern Mexico, New Mexico, you have this. And this is Shiprock, New Mexico. And from a distance, kind of interesting. And there again is that Navajo term, and I'm not going to try to pronounce it, but you can look at it. And it means rock with wings. I don't see the wings, but to some other people, it looked like a big ship, maybe a big masted ship. You get a little closer, and you say, wow, that thing is big, and it's volcanic. It's igneous rock that has hardened out here in the middle of the desert, surrounded by sandstone. Now, on our first trip to Shiprock, there was this wonderful ring of clouds surrounding it there. It made it even more mysterious and awesome looking. Now, some facts about Shiprock. The base elevation is 5,600 feet. That's where we're standing right now. Shiprock rises another 1,583 feet. Okay? Now, how big is 1,583 feet? Taller than the Empire State Building with antenna. To give you an idea of perspective. This thing is tall. It's enormous. And it shoots right up out of the desert floor. And as you're there, you also say, what is that great wall thing there? That is part of a volcanic dike that also formed at the same time as Shiprock. And it radiates out. There's two of them. One radiates south and one west of Shiprock. Here is a satellite image, and you can see this one goes westerly and this one goes southerly. And this highway here goes right through it at this particular point. Right there. And you can get right up close and personal and look at this rock, and you can get up and say, yeah, that looks like basalt. That's just a really interesting rock. I got this photo, this aerial photograph, courtesy of Aerial America, as I wanted you to kind of get some sort of a perspective of the view from the top of this place. Okay? This was lava. It had to harden in some sort of encasement. And that encasement had to be at least 1,500 feet high from that desert floor that you're looking at right now. Let's go back to talking about Agatha Peak and Navajo Mountain. Why did I save that for now? Because this is Agatha Peak. You'll drive right past this on the highway from Cayenta up to Monument Valley. Its base elevation is 5,660 feet, and it rises 1,436 feet. It is another volcanic neck, very similar to Beacon Rock, but much, much bigger. And this rock and Shiprock are about 2 hours drive from each other, maybe a little less. But these aren't the only formations. As you drive by, there are all these other unnamed little things just sticking out. Here's one, here's another, here's another. Again, this area was very geologically active at one point, and there was lava doing all kinds of work out here, erupting up through mud layers that were being deposited and have since been scoured away. And where is all that other material? It's not around there, baby. You can drive from Shiprock to Gallup, New Mexico, and you don't see it. It's gone. It's somewhere. Navajo Mountain is a little bit different, but it has very similar origins as well. Navajo Mountain is an example of what they call a laccolith, which then you say, what is a laccolith? Well, just for curiosity's sake, the elevation there is 10,388 feet. But a laccolith is formed when a volcanic dike is coming up and it reaches a certain layer and it can't break through that layer. Instead, it forms a bubble here, or basically a zit. So Navajo Mountain is a big pimple in southern Utah. But that's how it was formed. These last so many layers of surface, it was formed when a volcanic dike bowed it up like this because it, for whatever reason, didn't cleave through and break through those upper layers. Maybe because at the time, those layers had partially hardened, were a little bit more resistant, a little less, they didn't fracture, but again, for whatever reason, they were resistant when that lava got to that point, and it just separated those layers of earth and created this formation. And then Navajo Mountain is not the only example of latholic formations in the world. Okay, from shiprock, we're going to try something a little interesting. We're going to take that Indian Highway, Highway 12, and cut over back into Utah and get over to a little town called Chinle, which is the home of Canyon de Chelly National Monument, the only national monument that does not have an admission fee. So if anybody interested in going there, you can show up and drive on up and go to any of the viewpoints. Now, this is a very unusual place too, because inside the canyon itself live current-day Navajo, who are the descendants of the ancient Navajo that used to live there. And so you cannot go into the actual canyon unless you hire a Navajo tour guide to take you in through four-wheel drive into the canyon and give you a tour. But you can drive to any of the viewpoints at the top of the canyon and look down. And so we'll take you some there. Now, the word déchet is actually a French word, but it was a kind of a copying off of this Navajo word, which looks kind of like tessier, but anyway, I don't speak Navajo. I barely can get in and out of a Mexican restaurant with my life, so my Spanish is not that good, and I'm not even going to try Navajo, so there we are. But here is what the official brochure says about Canyon de Chelly and their geology. It says, the landscape of the American Southwest is like no other. In this land of striking beauty and contrast, visitors from around the world stand in awe as they gaze into the deep red rock canyons, up stony spires and over long mesas. Canyon de Chelly is not the deepest canyon in the Southwest, nor the widest, nor the longest, but its awesome beauty rivals that of any other. The sandstone cliffs of Canyon de Chelly National Monument embraces a past of more than, here we go, 200 million of geologic history and 2,000 years of human history. Now, then it talk about the layers, and you've got Supai Formation, de Chelly Sandstone, Shinneramp Conglomerate. Remember the Shinneramp was the one that they said was a stream deposit laid down? Okay, we're probably at least a good hour and a half, 2 hours drive from Monument Valley where the Shinneramp was there. Oh, that stream got here and there, and wow, that's incredible. So they go on to talk about this whole thing, and I'm not going to read it, but they talk about 30 million years ago, there was all the sandstone was deposited, then 50 million years later, the Chinle Formation was deposited. Then they talk about that was just to get all the layers. Then the canyon, they say, as the dinosaurs were facing extinction, two major geologic events took place that created today's canyons. The Defiance uplift, which took place 63 million years ago, and a second uplift of the Colorado Plateau 3 million years ago. I'd say more like 5,000 years ago or something, but joined with the forces of mountain building and stream cutting. As the plateaus and canyon walls rose, surging rivers cut through the rising rock. Surging rivers? There's a stream in there now that does flood during flash flood season, but there's no surging rivers. They didn't explain where that surging river was or where it came from. It doesn't seem to exist. Geologists believe that little has changed geologically since 10,000 years ago when the last ice age ended and early man inhabited the earth. All right, so, yeah, all that stuff there. Is this wonderful? So this is what you get to see from Canyon de Chelly. Now look at these walls and how steep these canyon walls are. Now here you can see evidence where there's some debris piling up there and here and here. This is at the very southern end of the canyon. And here's some more, but look at this one. Straight down to the bottom. And these canyon, in some places, these canyon walls are 800 feet straight down. Down there. And this is, if you can see carefully, in this picture, these are being farmed right here. And these are furrows right here where those crops are being planted by the current residents of the canyon. This is the White House cliff dwellings taken from the viewpoint just shortly before sunset. And by the way, speaking of sunsets, Canyon de Chelly, great place for sunsets there as well. So on our second trip there, we were able to hire a Navajo guide to take us into the canyon, and she took us in. So here were some of the things you see. And again, straight down to the bottom. Now, the evolutionary story is that these vertical walls were created by ice getting in there and freezing and fracturing, causing slabs to fall. Where's the slabs? Where's the debris? It's not there. What took the debris out? A little stream? I think not. This was Francine. She was our tour guide, and this was an elderly couple retired from San Jose, California. They asked me if I knew the way to San Jose, and I told them yes, I did. So these were some of the other areas. She's pointing out different petroglyphs and writings, because there were petroglyphs and pictographs from the Navajo and the Anasazi before them in the canyon there. This is the Antelope House ruins from the ground level. And this is taken from the viewpoint up above. And look at how that canyon wall is straight down and both. Now, get an idea, what would kind of carve this kind of a feature? A little stream over lots of years? No, I'm thinking serious water. Carve this out. There's a whole lot more to visit at Canyon de Chelly. And by the way, Canyon de Chelly is actually two canyons. There's Canyon de Chelly, which runs to the south, and Canyon del Muerto, which runs to the east. And it is del Muerto, Canyon of the Dead, because that's where several battles were fought between the U.S. and the Navajo during the Indian Wars. From Chile, we drop straight down and get back on Interstate 40 and head over to the Petrified Forest National Park, which is a little bit of a misleading name, and I will show you why. But when you get into the park, you walk around and you start seeing these chunks of petrified wood all over the place. And some of them are absolutely gorgeous. And you can't touch them or pick them up or move them or stuff them in your pocket or in your trunk. Don't try it. The tree itself is identified as, let's see if I can get this, Aracaroxylon arizonicum, which is basically an extinct tree. It doesn't exist anymore. But what's even more interesting is that you see these logs laying around. In this case, it looked like somebody ran them through a slice-o-matic thing, because they're just chopped up in little pieces laying there. But as you go around there and you see these piles of rocks, and again, the color from these different minerals in these rocks are gorgeous, but this is as much of a root as they can find. There is no evidence that any of these petrified trees ever grew in this location. There's no evidence of roots or forests. None of these trees are vertical. They're all laying around. It's like, it's very similar to what's going on in Spirit Lake, with trees being deposited and laying there. This isn't where they grew. This wasn't where the forest grew. This is where a whole bunch of trees got washed up at some point in the flood. And then they got buried enough to be petrified and then exposed later. But there is no evidence that these trees ever actually grew on this site. Now, while you cannot take the petrified wood yourself, there's lots of, it exists in other areas outside of the national park. And so the Navajos will take the rocks and they will take a piece and they'll polish it up and put it on some jewelry and sell it to you on one of their little roadside stands, if you want to. So from petrified forests, again, you look at this and you say, are we supposed to believe that these trees grew here, and then they fell down, then they got buried somehow, then they got exposed somehow, and now here they are? The flood model makes much, much better logical sense in terms of how they got there, how they would have gotten buried, how they would have gotten then re-exposed, and the fact that they cannot find any evidence of roots of where these trees actually were planted. We're going to head over to the town of Winslow, Arizona. You may have heard of Winslow, Arizona. You can actually stand on a corner in Winslow, Arizona. It's such a fine sight to see. And they even have a park there. You might even see a flatbed Ford. Hey, you never know. I did say I was going to include some cultural things on this, right? But aside from a really cool souvenir gift shop and Sonic during happy hour, there's not much in Winslow, Arizona, I'm afraid. So we'll leave Winslow. And we'll head down Highway 87, and we're going to come down to this next place. As you head down Highway 87, you'll go through two little towns. First one you'll come to is called Strawberry. The second one is Pine. As you go through Pine, you'll look up and you'll see this formation right here, which we'll be talking about in a bit. But I want to take us to Tonto Natural Bridge State Park. We're getting close, folks. We'll be almost out of here. Tonto Natural Bridge is the largest travertine natural bridge in existence that we know of. Travertine, you may have heard, they make countertops and things out of it. What is travertine? Well, it's basically the same thing like limestone cave in Oregon caves. Here's their basic description, and I'm just going to breeze through this because I am looking at the clock there. You have these different layers are laid down, and then they're tilted, and then you get some more sediment comes in, covered by seawater, it says. That's interesting that they would say that. Then you've got a faulting and erosion, and then you have this travertine, this calcium carbonate, leaking out of here and forming this bridge, but there's a creek running through there, and so as it leaches out of this ground on the one side, and you have the stream coming through, it cuts and it creates this natural bridge. Now, as far as the basic geology and chemistry goes, it all seems pretty sound. It's just their time scale. They say it took millions of years to happen, but I believe it could have very easily happened at the end of the flood. And here, as you walk around, you can see these look just like the kind of things you see inside Oregon caves when you take the Oregon cave trip. Then you come to the town of Payson, Arizona. This is the sign you see as you're coming in from the north. This is the sign you see as you come in from the south. And by the way, Payson has some really beautiful sunsets there too. In fact, Payson is also known as the stargazing capital of America because you're about an hour and a half drive outside of Phoenix, so there's no problem with ambient light. There's no industry in the area, so there's no industrial pollution, and because of the pine forests that grow there, the dust level is very low, and so they have some of the clearest night skies for night stargazing things. So that is an interesting feature there. As you look north, though, from the town of Payson, you see this geologic formation. This is called the Mogollon Rim. It was named after Don Juan Ignacio Flores Mogollon, who was the Spanish governor of New Mexico from 1712 to 1715. This is an escarpment that rises 2,000 feet from its base. And from various places in the city, you can see it out there. Now, any of you have ever been over to eastern Oregon, you're familiar with Abert Rim, perhaps. Abert Rim is an escarpment that shoots up 1,200 feet from the floor from a fault that follows along the rim, the Abert Fault. The Mogollon is actually the southern margin of the Colorado Plateau, and it runs for 200 miles across the state of Arizona here, like this. This is when the Colorado Plateau was uplifted, then this is where that boundary, that demarcation of the southern edge of the Colorado Plateau occurred. Now, here is a little chart showing the different rock formations, and this is more closer to the Sedona area, but in the Grand Canyon, you're familiar that the Hermit Shale is an upper layer, and right above the Hermit Shale is the Coconino Sandstone. Well, just a little farther south here at the Mogollon, you also have the Schnebly Hill Sandstone, and in some cases, even the Fort Apache Limestone, which can be as thick as 900 feet. Just an extra layer sandwiched in there, which exists down here, but not up at the Grand Canyon level. Just a fascinating little fact how that got in there. The Mogollon is actually an example of a monocline. And a monocline is similar to a fault in that faulting does occur, but the fault does not breach the upper layers of sedimentary rock. At this point, they fold and come down. So there is a faulting taking place. It's just that there's no evidence of the fault breaching at the surface of the earth. Okay, well, that's interesting. But what's even more interesting is that the site of that monocline is not right at the base of where the Mogollon Rim is. The site of the fault is 6 miles south of here. Something has eroded 6 miles of the Colorado Plateau away from the edge of the Colorado Plateau. Where is it? Do you see it out there? I don't, and neither does anybody else either. What could account for 6 miles of erosion? Now, they say that it faulted, and then over the years, long, slow, gradual processes eroded this area away. Where did it go? It seems to make sense that if you're going to have a piece of rock sticking out there for 6 million years, or so many millions of years, it would be kind of rounded. Well, this is drop. I mean, here are some examples. That's vertical, people. And that 2,000-foot drop is pretty steep. Now, what makes better sense? Hello, come on. What makes better sense, if you're going to try to get rid of 6 miles worth of sediment, is when this Colorado Plateau was upraised, you not only had water going off through the Grand Canyon, but you would have had lots of water cascading over this bluff. And in some way similar to Dry Falls in the Channel Scablands, you had water coming over this edge and scouring away that 6 miles as it retreats its way back, and eventually the floodwater stopped. But the side of that monocline, somewhere you have to account for 6 miles worth of erosion, because that soil that was there isn't there. And it's strangely, you have to really dig in the literature to find out about the fact that, well, yeah, the monocline, they're in a 6 miles discrepancy, and then they just kind of don't really want to give you an explanation as to where they think all of that sediment went to. Which brings us to this verse here, Psalm 104, verse 8. The mountains rose, the valleys sank down to the place that you appointed for them. Well, when that was happening, there was some serious water moving across the face of the planet. All right, so we've come this far. So far, we've traveled 1,243 miles. We haven't even touched Canyonlands up in Utah, or the Wave in Paria Canyon in northern Arizona, or Blue Canyon in central Arizona in the Painted Desert. These are all on my wish list. Or Window Rock, which is the headquarters of the Navajo Nation tribal headquarters. Is located in Window Rock, Arizona. And there's a whole lot of other places, certainly, in that region to see. And this is just a few that I've been able to incorporate. So here we are in Payson. To get us back to Phoenix, we only have to zip down Highway 87, also known as the Beeline Highway. Brings you into Mesa. From there, you shoot over, you get on PHX, and you get to take off. Although, if it's all the same to you, I'd like to stay behind in Payson. And my wife and I would someday like to settle there ourselves. We're not sure exactly when that will be, though, but someday, because we think it's a pretty cool place. But I wanted to also bring up this scripture verse here, Luke 19:40. He, being Jesus, answered, I tell you, if these, his disciples, were silent, the very stones would cry out. And when I see these kind of geologic features, I get inspired. I think it's really cool because it reminds me of the fact that the biblical account really makes the best sense. It really is the most trustworthy resource in terms of understanding our history and where we came from. And God's word is authoritative. And if Jesus says this is the way it was, then that's all the more reason that we should believe the Genesis account. And as we look at geology, whether it's in Eastern Oregon, Eastern Washington, whether it's anywhere we go, everywhere we go, when you begin to have that biblical framework for understanding how geological formations were laid down and how they were eroded, it makes sense. And you don't have to be intimidated or fret about when you read something that says millions of years ago, or when you go to a museum or national park, you can say, yeah, that's okay. Well, they can say what they want to say, but you can stand firm in your faith knowing that God's word is true. 2 Peter 3:5 goes on to start by saying, for this they willingly are ignorant of, the scoffers in the end times, that by the word of God the heavens were of old, and the earth standing out of the water and in the water, whereby the world that then was, being overflowed with water, perished. This is what the scoffers don't want to deal with. The fact that God judged the world, which gives him the right to judge the world, which gives him the right to judge the world again when it suits him. But the heavens and the earth, which are now, by the same word, are kept in store, reserved unto fire against the day of judgment and the perdition of ungodly men. I don't want to be caught on the wrong side of that judgment, and I know that you don't either. That's why you took the trouble to get yourself all dressed and come out on this rainy Oregon day to hear this presentation this morning, and I want to thank you again very much for that. But I want to close on this here. Revelation 21:1. Going back to what I shared with you at the beginning. Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away. And John the Revelator says, and there was no longer any sea. Now, why would he include that in there? Could it be, I'm just throwing this out for you to think about, that by making mention of the fact that there is not going to be any sea any longer, because the sea was tied with judgment, could it be that what he's trying to show us is that in this earth made new, that there will be no more future judgments, that everything will be settled and that the universe will be in harmony from then on throughout the rest of eternity? That's the way I like to think of it. John 7:17, thy word is truth. And I hope that today you have had your faith strengthened and your confidence in God's word established even more so. And by the way, did I mention that Payson has some really incredible sunsets? And that is the end of the presentation.